Gorongosa is actually one of the better examples of how you have to be flexible in realizing these big conservation goals. We are an incredibly adaptable organization. Our approaches to conservation have to constantly evolve. And I want to mention something that also links to the previous point, namely the corridors. When you look at map of Africa, map of Mozambique, there's this place, the central Mozambique, from Mount Gorongosa to the coast. We would love if this entire area were a national park. And so if you spoke to us, 10 years ago, that would have been our goal. But that's not realistic. You cannot simply tell people, you have to leave now, this is going to be a protected area. So we have to use some other approaches, and we have to be far more flexible in what strategies we use to protect the greatest amount of biodiversity in that area. So what we are trying to do now is to create a corridor that stretches for about 150 kilometers from the coast inland, and a corridor that will encompass all possible types of landscapes and ecosystems that can be found in this part of the world. Now, again, we cannot simply declare this is a protected area. We have to work with local communities. We have to work with the government, and we have to decide what is the best strategy that will satisfy both our requirements for conservation, but also will make this this conservancy beneficial to people who are already there. We will never be able, and we will never want to remove people or make life miserable for people who are already there. So we have to, for example, abandon certain plants. Okay, we would love to have that part be part of our conservancy, but this is an important part to the community. They traditionally, they've always grown whatever sorghum there. We cannot simply do that. So we have to find a different way. We have to find either a comparable place where we can instill a slightly stricter conservation rules, or we simply abandon that and we go somewhere else. But we're still trying to create a big corridor that connects, Mount Gorongosa to the mangroves on the coast. So just like with, all these other approaches, 30 by 30, 50 by 50, you have to be flexible, but you have to be driven towards that ultimate goal. On our log, again, I'm speaking from the perspective of this small pixel on the map of life. We want to create a corridor that will encompass and connect all possible types of landscapes in this part of the continent. And we have to use the same approach on the global scale. And we do that, again, by being flexible, being adaptable, but always keeping in mind two things. One, that we cannot do it alone. Whatever we do in terms of conservation has to be beneficial to people on the ground. And B, we will achieve that goal. We are realists, but we are optimists. And we know that sooner or later we will achieve that goal. And I think the same approach will work on the global scale, and we will achieve the half Earth goal. Maybe not in 2050, but we will.
Walter, do you have anything to add about? I know you're involved in so many of these targets, and various working groups. Do you have any comments about these goals?
Yeah, no, happy to chime in. And this is a very relevant discussion, not only because of Ed's birthday yesterday and his book, and obviously the fact that there's no time to lose here in saving species and thinking about how we could do that. It's also really a timely discussion because for example, the goals, the targets of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the big biodiversity convention, like we have a climate convention. You may have heard about the Paris Accord, right? That talked about the 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius decision. There is actually a same sort of convention for biodiversity. And the question is, well, what is it? How much area, how much biodiversity do we want to sustain going forward for future generations? Well over 150 governments signed up to that convention. Again, the US in its own separate status, not fully a signatory to that convention, but participating. So right now, these renegotiations are happening, and a key question is, right, going forward, how much area should each nation kind of put aside or prioritize for species, for biodiversity, for conservation? And increasingly, there is already a recognition that that doesn't just need to be formal reserves. It could be alternative management areas, and I think that's a good recognition. But we are still in these discussions, and there's a whole set of international policy, science policy interface discussions going on that I'm participating in some of those. There is still that thinking that, well, we're just going to settle on a number that then every nation should be trying to achieve, whether that be 18%, well, thankfully not anymore. That's what 17 or 18% was the recent target, the 2020 target, that we're now trying to go beyond and do better. But what is the right 2030 or 2050 target? And actually a key realization that comes out of Ed's book, ultimately, and that comes from putting species first, rather than thinking about square kilometers first, is that it's not going to be the same amount of area in every part of the world. Say the Northeast here, there are some really important places that we need to protect, otherwise we may lose some species for forever. But the Northeast here in the US is not the same as, say, Mozambique, or as the Eastern Arc Mountains in Africa, or as some ridges in the Andes in South America, which may have hundreds or thousands of species restricted to just them. So we need to think about different numbers and efforts needed in different parts of the world. And as an international community, we need to think about mechanisms that could support that. Because we cannot expect that, as you said, Piotr, the Mozambique people just decide or are happy to put a good chunk of their land, of their territory aside for conservation for the greater good alone. And it is, however, a fact that they are global stewards of these important biological resources. It's these sorts of points and discussion elements that we'd like to bring into this larger international discussion, and that we are trying to work into some of these international agreements. And that's where I see the particular role of science and science policy, if you will, advocacy, and also engagement with businesses, by the way, that's inspired by Ed and the science of biogeography, and the science of thinking about species in a geographic context in the changing world.